Thank you for everybody who is joining us live, and thanks for everybody who is tuning in afterwards. Super excited to welcome you to the 4th episode of our Support Squad webinar series. This is our 4th and final. I see a few familiar names, so looks like some people are rejoining us. Hopefully it's been an impactful and information-filled couple webinars. My name is Justin Peters. I moderated the webinar in May. Abby graciously invited me to come back to moderate this 4th and final webinar. So super excited to be a part of this conversation today. Our topic that we are going to be covering is how to organize support after a cancer diagnosis. And I will not do a lot of the talk. I actually have a group of 3 amazing panelists that are joining me today. I'll give a short bio on each one as we're kicking things off here, and then they'll jump in once they start answering some questions and fill you in on some of the rest of their background. But joining me first is Rachel Westlake. Rachel is the founder of Circadian Health Advocacy, where she provides individual advocate support to cancer survivors. She's also board certified patient advocate and a 2-time cancer survivor. So Rachel, thanks for joining us. Second is Julie Germann. Julie is a psychologist at the Children's Medical Center of Dallas, where she works with the oncology team in the Center of Cancer and Blood Disorders. She also has interest. Her clinical and research interests include the impact of child and family hope on coping with illness. So that will be really interesting to hear more about. And then finally, Nick Iannarino, associate professor at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. He is a PhD in communication studies, and his dissertation was social support in young adult cancer survivors and their close social network members. So amazing. I'm super excited for each of you to hear from each of you. We got to kick things off a little bit beforehand, so know a little bit about your background, but really excited to learn some more. Just a few housekeeping items before we do kick off this conversation, though. Everybody that is tuning in, you are in listen-only mode, so feel free to use the chat as frequent as you would like. As I mentioned, tell me where you're from. If you have questions, drop them into the chat. We would love to answer those on the fly or answer them at the Q&A session afterwards. And if you hear a great quote or great piece of advice, would love to hear post about that in the chat as well. So this recording, if you have to dip out early, will be available afterwards on our website, and that's b-present.org. And then finally, we would love if you interacted with us on social media. So feel free to take a screenshot of this conversation right now, post it on your social media account, and tell us your favorite takeaway from this conversation. So I think I spoke enough there, and I'm excited to kick this conversation off. We're going to first talk about understanding the impact and defining needs. And I think a really great place to start would just be the importance of support from a high level standpoint throughout all the phases of cancer. Julie, I feel like you might be a great person to kind of kick this off for us. So with that in mind, from a high level, why is support important throughout the cancer journey?
Yeah, it's so important to have stay connected, I think, is the biggest thing. That when I think of adolescents and young adults and all the life transitions that they're going through, there's such big and rapid change with everything. And developmentally, people in adolescence and young adulthood are focused very much on their relationships. And that is disrupted so much with cancer treatment and being out of school or out of college or out of work and having to, even pre-pandemic, forget the pandemic, having to isolate because they're immunocompromised or things. There's just so many disruptions in the relationships all over in their life. And so from a high level, that's why the support is so important, to just not feel disconnected, feel left out of life, have no idea what's going on, feel like you're in a bucket by yourself or things like that. So for a very high level, it's very important just from the sense of, what are adolescents and young adults supposed to be doing developmentally in their life right now? They're supposed to have friendships. They're supposed to be focusing more outside of the family than in the family. They're supposed to be figuring out dating and career and who they are and what they want to do and everything like that. And without staying connected and staying that support, then it's just compounds all the impact that cancer has on what they're supposed to be doing in life right now.
Yeah. And I don't want to make any assumptions. So I'll turn this over to Rachel. You are a 2-time cancer survivor, but what I've noticed through conversations with many people that have gone through cancer is that at different times there's different needs of support. And that support really doesn't end after treatment either. Can you expand a little bit on that, both from your own personal experience and then also working with your different clients?
That's very true. That support is needed in survivorship so much, all stages of survivorship, from diagnosis to years after treatment, and if you receive conventional treatment. And that initial support is also really important so that when you're done, transition into the next stages of life are not so awkward or crunchy or hard. Being in an isolated bubble during treatment is going to be, you're going to have unique experiences from your peers, no matter what. But if you remain connected, some of those transitions are a little bit easier later. And also, I think one of the really important things is that the person going through a cancer experience's needs are going to change through different stages and depending on where they are in their life. When I was a young person and 15 years old and diagnosed with cancer, when I was first diagnosed, my concerns, immediately were about hair, cross country, my relationship, my romantic relationship that I was in, and then mid-treatment, it was just sort of learning how to give myself shots, crazy different levels of support were needed. And then when I was sick at 35, I had very different experiences during those phases too. So it was really important for me to have specific support during those specific phases.
Mm-hmm. And this might be a good time to share a little bit about your background, both your cancer experience. You already mentioned you had cancer at 35, but you also had cancer, I believe, at 15. So you had a 20-year gap, if I remember right, correct?
I did. Had a weird 20-year gap.
So what did your first cancer experience look like?
I was diagnosed at late 14 years old, I think, with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. B-cell lymphoma, they called it then. And I had a tumor wrapped around my spinal cord about the size of a grapefruit that was also in my pelvis. I had neurosurgery to remove that. And then I did about 13 months of experimental chemo at that time. And I did okay, in the sense that I made it through that very difficult treatment. I was in the hospital a lot, and then I transitioned into survivorship, and that was really a really difficult time for me. And that's why I focus a lot on survivorship post-treatment with the people that I work with. And then when I was 35, I got diagnosed again, probably as a result of a follicular lymphoma component, which mutated again into a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so all of the phases that we're talking about are actually why I wanted to start helping people in post-treatment. I think at this point, there are so many amazing resources and services available to cancer survivors, but it's really hard to know that they're there when you're recovering. And even really great IA programs and hospitals are still building tools to connect folks with those resources. So whether you want a scholarship or a foot doctor, you need specific things post-treatment. So I try and help folks connect to those things.
Yeah. Totally makes sense. Maybe we even take a step back here now and talk about what support is. And Nick, would love for you to expand on this a little bit. I was super interested in your dissertation. You talked to, I believe, 30 different patients at that time. And it seemed like you were learning a lot about what is good support, what is not good support. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So for my dissertation, like you said, I talked to, I think, 32 young adult cancer survivors, people who had been diagnosed between the ages of 18 to 39, according to the National Cancer Institute designation, and who had completed primary treatment during that age range, who were still within that age range too, because like a lot of what Julie and Rachel were talking about in terms of identity and kind of like what these concerns that we would attribute typically to an 18 to 39-year-old that are so unique from who most of society maybe attributes to being a cancer patient, people in their 60s and 70s who have such different needs than young people. I also talked to, for the majority of people who I interviewed, they were able to kind of nominate a person who was really close to them at the time of their diagnosis and going through treatment. And I also talked to them in the event that I was able to. And then I also talked to about 10 supporters who were not kind of tied to any patients that I talked to. So I think all in all, it was 32 patients and 32 supporters. And what's really interesting is I saw different sides of this support dynamic that we've kind of been talking about. And so I thought it was interesting to kind of get a different perspective on, so much of it is, what the patient or the survivor finds helpful or unhelpful, but also some of the challenges that face supporters, some of the things that we'll talk about today. But yeah, so just I guess to say, take a step back. Support is basically anything that people do to help one another. And I'm in communication, so I study it from like a message perspective. So like specifically, through body language or through like even like instrumental tasks or just kind of saying, things that can help someone emotionally or their identity or their self-esteem. Those kind of things are passing along information we would consider in this context social support. And one of the things that my dissertation talks about and a lot of research before me talked about is that social support is kind of judged in the eye of the beholder, like people. And I think this is really prevalent in young adult cancer, but I don't think it's necessarily limited to this age group or even this disease specifically. But a lot of times people don't know what to say, and kind of in their attempts to be positive or attempts to be thoughtful or really supportive, they say things that are really invalidating or uncomfortable, or sometimes they don't say anything at all. And so I think one of the challenges facing young adults who go through cancer, and Julie mentioned this, like it's really difficult as a 18, 19, 20-year-old to deal with your relationships in the first place. And then you have this experience of cancer later on top, and you have friends who sometimes freak out because they've never been through anything like this with a peer. Everyone might have a older relative who's gone through a really difficult experience, or a parent in some cases, but sometimes we don't know what to say to our best friends when they are going through these things, or we don't know what to do. And so sometimes we put our feet in our mouth, or sometimes we don't do anything. And so that's kind of what I've been studying and trying to find some ways to improve that.
And how did you find yourself, what seemed like somebody that was initially interested in media, film studies? I saw a few really different interests in your bachelor's, find yourself in this highly specialized, dissertation that you wrote on. Like, I'm really interested the journey, that couple-year journey from I'm a general communication to I'm studying specifically what you're studying right now.
Sure. Yeah. So I have always been interested in, I've always loved stand-up comedy. I've always loved movies and memoirs, especially from people who have gone through really difficult experiences. And for some reason, I was always drawn to those. And I always hated it was always really difficult to get me to like read something that was really devastating or had a reputation for being like, really inspirational, or something like Tuesdays with Maury, like, never, like, it was always hard for me to get geared up to read those types of things. And so I was always really interested in this idea of like confessional comedy, of stand-ups who told stories about times where they, had a really difficult experience, and it was still hilarious when they told it. And so that was what my thesis ended up being. At University of Dayton, I wrote about comedians who had severe illness experiences, including cancer, and a rare sleepwalking disorder in the case of one of my favorite comedians, Mike Birbiglia. But right around that time, I kind of came across an article from Newsweek in 2009 that talked about how young adults going through cancer were creating blogs and websites. And this was like in the early days of like Stupid Cancer. I don't even think it was called Stupid Cancer then. I think it was like the I'm Too Young for This Foundation still. And places like Planet Cancer were kind of these burgeoning subgroups online. And they were using humor in ways that we kind of see all the time now on Instagram. Like if anyone follows the cancer patient on here, and if you don't, you should, it's hilarious. But very snarky humor, very Black humor that's so different than what kind of the older people in our life typically use. So like a lot of the hope and pink and optimism, and we saw a lot of sarcasm and stuff. And so this article was written, and I was like, man, as someone who's interested in humor, this is really interesting to me. And right around that time too, when my best friend from high school was diagnosed with testicular cancer, I saw that he had a lot of the social struggles that I explained earlier, or talked about earlier, but especially with support. And he was a person who was very, did not want to show vulnerability. And so he didn't really tell his friends or a lot of his family members that he was going through this experience. And that in some ways kind of isolated his romantic partner at the time. And so that kind of inspired me to dig a little bit deeper, and I kept the work up after my dissertation.
Super interesting. And I would be curious, everybody who's tuning in right now, are you currently going through cancer? Are you a survivor? Are you a supporter? We'd love to just get a little bit more direction, and we can steer the conversation if it's leaning one way or another. But if you could use the chat and let us know. And Nick, kind of picking up on that thought, and I'll hand this off to Julie to start with. How do you know what's helpful and what could have a negative, like the opposite effect? Like, and with your friends that wanted to keep things private, maybe you were thinking you were reaching out and doing all these things and just trying to stay connected and help him in that sense. But he was somebody that just wanted to keep it private. From Julie, from your experience, what have you noticed, drawing the line between what's helpful and what's not?
Yeah, I think it's such an individual answer, as we've, sort of started talking about with everything. And I think, one thing that sort of strikes me is when there's maybe a disconnect between a disconnect in the match between what the patient and what the supporter is intending. It kind of makes sense. Like if the patient wants to be kind of private and their friends are not very intrusive, then that's a fine match. But if the patient is like, I'm like really a people person, I really want people to reach out to me and do stuff, or at least send me a text of what's going on, or send me some food or something, and nobody does, then that's when the disconnect comes up. The mismatch between that. What I think is the really hard part of that is that there has to be some way for both sides to be able to communicate so they know whether they're matching or not, and so one thing that one of you mentioned about like people being private about stuff is that sometimes I think as a clinician, I work with patients that are struggling more with certain things. And so, that's a particular perspective. But what I see with some people trying to be private so much is kind of what's the motivation for that? Are they just dispositionally a private person and more introverted, kind of keep things close to the vest and, circle the wagons when things happen, and they're just not, that extroverted or gregarious anyway, so is that just how they are and that's their personality style and that's how things were before, or is that really a change for them? And then all of a sudden they have these conceptions about, no, nobody can know this because of, X, Y, and Z or whatever. And then they spend so much time and energy trying to cover it up that they when really they want some support, but they're trying to cover it up because, some other feelings. And so, that was a long circuitous answer, but I'm just kind of thinking it through that I think it's really about the match or the mismatch.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a way for people to communicate back and forth about what that is. One of my favorite examples from a patient that I worked with maybe 10 years ago now, but he was like 16 and he wanted some support and he didn't know how to ask for it. And just one day at clinic, 5 friends just surprised him at clinic. And some people that would not be good for. But for this patient, he was like, all my patients, all my friends just showed up here. I'm not sure why they're here, but they decided they're going to come and hijack my clinic visit so they can see what's going on and see what I need. And it just resulted in this really nice discussion of them saying, we don't know what he needs. So we wanted to go and find out what's going on with him and what he needs. And so we don't know when he texts us, sorry, the air conditioner in the back, when he texts us and says, I'm having a really bad day, does he mean I want to talk about that now? Or does he mean distract me from that with something else? And so again, people just need a platform of something to be able to say, this is what I need. Or this is what I don't need. Don't do this, or, don't send me 5,000 stuffed animals because I'm not interested in that. But send me some Chipotle or something. I don't know. But they need to be able to have this dialogue.
Yeah. Rachel, I know you have thoughts to add to this. How would you, if a cancer patient came to you and asked how they could communicate with people that they know are good-willed and are trying to support them, but there is just this misalignment?
Who they know are good-willed, is that what you said?
Yeah.
I think sometimes that's when a really close friend or family member can play a really pivotal role in organizing folks. And so that if that patient, if that person doesn't want to declare their needs or have a big meeting to talk about it, which can also be great. I'm super for, like if someone does feel extroverted enough and like they're willing to gather friends on Zoom and say, I don't know how to do this. I feel this, and this. I'm sure you're having feelings. Let's do our best just to, like if they have the emotional literacy and are of the age to be able to start to set tones on their own, that's great. They're putting themselves at the center of their care team by doing that. They're self-advocating, and that's a great way. But also, somebody going through this stuff does not have to do that, and shouldn't feel pressure to do that. And in that case, it could be a great time to bring in a loved one or a best friend or someone to say, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I think I need right now. That may change. Can you help me organize and find some tools to communicate with folks? Can you organize the schedule? Can you be a point person? It's a starting point. And not everybody even has that, which is a whole other thing. Not everybody has this beautiful opportunity for support.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we want to talk about some tools on easing communication. And as we transition that, one thing that I believe it was you, Nick, that mentioned in our pre-call was this concept, and what Rachel was alluding to is this information keeper. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so it's pretty much exactly what Rachel was talking about, like nominating somebody to kind of be a go-between between the patient or the survivor and maybe the rest of the support network. And I think it's sometimes hard to pick that person, especially in the context of young adulthood, because our relationships are shifting, and sometimes cancer can kind of speed up relational changes that would kind of happen gradually over like a quote unquote normal period in our lives. But like, for example, one of the things that I've noticed in my research is people who are in new relationships, romantic relationships, where they feel like it's maybe going somewhere, but you're still maybe in your early 20s, and you've had a parent or two parents who've always been really there for you and really, really good at supporting you during your health experiences and stuff. And but then you have this romantic partner who's like, well, I see this relationship kind of becoming serious, and I feel like I should also have a say, and I feel like I'm with the patient more often than a parent, or and this can be in the same case of one friend versus another friend or something. And some people find it difficult to find ways to get those two supporters on the same page, so that it's not a bunch of jostling about well, I know what's best for the patient, and so it's like another really difficult task on top of a really difficult situation. Like the start of, once you're diagnosed with cancer, it's a really chaotic experience. You have a million things on your mind, not only in terms of starting cancer treatment, but also trying to make decisions about fertility and stuff. And then you have all this, what we call communication work that you have to perform, where you have to inform other people about, like what you're going through and what you would like them to do and the types of support you would like to receive. And it is burdensome. And it's something that a lot of times when people go through cancer, they feel like they have the responsibility to protect other people as much as they do to protect themselves. And so having a person kind of serve that role for you can be helpful, but again, it's hard to sometimes pick who that person is.
Interesting. And is social media, or at minimum, like a big group text, a viable option, or have you noticed that's probably not the right path to disseminate information out?
Like Rachel said, it really depends on the person, and it really depends on your support network and your situation. But like I know for me, I'm the type of person who, if I was going through a cancer diagnosis, I would probably not be all over Instagram or Facebook, posting about my experience. And that's just not my personality. It's not really who I am, and I probably wouldn't change after a diagnosis. I would definitely keep my kind of close family members in the loop and my friends in the loop. But there's other people who, throughout their experience, they share a lot on social media, and they're totally comfortable doing that. And so what I think is a really good happy medium is doing group texts, group emails. I know in things like Caring Bridge, you can, in other blog situations, you can have a live journal where you share a password and maybe not tell the whole world about what you're going through, but it's a good way to not have to like individually talk to everybody and go through all these emotional conversations and be like, oh, did I tell you about this? I tell you about that. It's one thing in one place you can kind of send people a link to, and you have more time to kind of sit and process your thoughts and clarify your needs. And even just the tone that you write, or the tone that you, even if you're more of a vlogger or something like that, you can, by the way that you are presenting your experience and how you're coping with it, you give other people the permission maybe to use humor with you, or to talk about certain situations and certain things and not other things, and those kind of things. And so I think getting out in front of it if possible, and if you're the type of person who wants to control the information in a way that's not really as burdensome as it would be talking individually, I think social media or like group mediated communication would be a really good tool.
And it looks like we have some supporters and caregivers in the chat. So I'd love to get your guys' feedback, how you guys are receiving information about your loved ones. Rachel, what was your experience in particular? How did you share information out with your support network?
When I was 15 in 1995, I was calling people on my Garfield phone that I got from Time Magazine. My family told people, my friends would call and talk to each other. It was so different, and it's so interesting to think about it next to 2015. People didn't know what to do, and we weren't emailing. So, and we were very young. So people did whatever they thought was best at the time. And that went right a lot because there was tons of genuine human connection happening. People were seeing me in person. There was no COVID, so people talked to me and asked, and I told, because that was what we were doing. In 2015, I did a Caring Bridge like thing. I wrote out a couple times and I shared my experience, and people wrote back and sent emails and sent love, and I would share that on Facebook.
Julie, what do you have to add to this conversation? I would love to hear from your perspective on both sharing status and requesting from a supporter standpoint. What have you seen?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up about the idea of social media because in some of the research that we've done with our adolescents and young adults, they have talked about the difference between like oncology peers as supports versus like other life peer supports, and sort of the different types of support they want from that. And it's been really interesting. Again, it's all individual and very similar. I have two 18-year-old males, very similar backgrounds, but one is like, I just forget hospital. I want to leave that all behind. When I'm not here, I want to like just focus on everything. I want to go play soccer, and I want to go, eat meals with my family, and I don't want to hear anything about it. And then the guy next door is like, I need to talk to people that understand what I've gone through and that sort of thing. And so can you connect me with, somebody else in the program, or somebody else at the center that might be similar, just somebody I can talk to like that. And then, and sort of third level of that has also been like the social media of, being a really good way with things like the cancer patient or stupid cancer, or like disease specific Facebook groups or different kind of things, is to also get another level of that support, again, from people who you, are not going to meet on the street or in the clinic, but that really understand your experience and know what you're talking about. Again, just sort of different individual things that people need and ask and request for, but it's so individual of like, I want to not focus on this oncology thing, or I really do. I need to talk to somebody that's like me, that's going through my experience.
Julie, do you feel like that changes even with like individual people over time? From my experience, it feels like, especially during treatment, maybe some information from people who are going through it, but it feels like afterwards is when, at least the people I've talked to, have really wanted to connect with others who had similar experiences. Is that similar to what you've heard?
Yeah, we have a patient advisory board of people off treatment and who are like in their early to mid 20s. And across the board, they've said, I wish when I was going through treatment that all those time people came around to my clinic room or my inpatient room and said, here, come out of your room to this activity or get involved in this thing to meet other people. I wish I had done that. They say that across the board, but also like seems very normal. Also the experience of just when you're in the treatment, it's like all hands on deck and let's get through this nausea and this pain or this fatigue or this sort of thing. That's all. Let's manage these appointments and these blood draws and these tests and stuff. And that's all I got the bandwidth for right now. And while, idealistically later, they are like, I wish I had done that then, but I also didn't feel like I had the bandwidth to do that then. And I'd love to hear from Rachel if that kind of fit your experience or not too. And also, was that very different at 15 and 35?
Yeah. I didn't do any of the joining things during either treatment. And I probably didn't do it the second time because of what happened in the first. I was matched through my doctors with someone when I was a teen, and that person, although they were kind and lovely, was not someone that I had anything in common with besides the fact that we had the same cancer. And that felt really forced, and it was really hard for both of us, especially because we didn't have a lot of bandwidth. We were both actually going through really intensive treatments, and it was a weird juggling. I won't go into all of it, but it was really hard. And then when I was in treatment the second time, I went to one survivorship group during. I met a good friend, and we're still friends, and it's great. But even at that time, I wasn't online very much or anything like that. And it wasn't until a couple years later that I realized how much folks were connecting on social media with other survivors, and then even how much that's like grown over the past year with people being online more. It's kind of amazing.
Definitely.
So if we transition to the bulk of this conversation, which I think is going to be forming the support squad and keeping it strong, essentially. From a supporter viewpoint, how do you go out determining your role in all of that? And I'll leave that open to whoever wants to start that conversation.
I think that has a lot to do with, again, age, and where folks are at in their emotional literacy, which often correlates with age. And by emotional literacy, I mean, how well do you know how to deal with your emotions and understand them? So finding where you fit, I think, has to often be a very intentional thing. And if you're a group of people and you're well organized, you can talk to each other about what kinds of roles that you play. But I think it's a whole other thing if you're a young person and you haven't supported anyone through anything hard before. So how are you going to know what you're good at? I think, first of all, just that open tone of, we're going to figure this out, and I love you, friend, and it might take some trial and error, is really healthy and helpful up front. Just to open the communication up in general and say, tell me if I'm doing something wrong, I'm figuring it out. And then I often think of, when folks are trying to organize for supporting other people, I often, it reminds me of how to organize for change in any way, or social justice, or organizing with your community. And there are kind of these maps that make up support, so that support works well as a unit. And I'm gonna put a link in the chat for different roles that people can play, like the frontline responder. So in this case, it might be someone who, is really good immediately in the crisis and is able to come to that person's side, is not scared of the emergency end of the situation. And then there might be people who are really good at connecting all of the other folks together. There are people who might be really good at caregiving and are good at doing the bedside support. So I think having kind of some models can be really helpful if you don't have the lived experience of helping people through things that are hard.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the guide that you shared, and there's a lot of interesting titles on here. Any other titles? I know you mentioned the frontline responder, but something like weavers, storytellers, disruptors, caregivers. I know this is around social change, but any other titles that really jump out to you as somebody that's important to maybe identify early on?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, and I think like a visionary, using these words, can be really helpful, because I was thinking that right now people have to probably be really innovative in how they're supporting their folks. And if somebody has a birthday in the middle of COVID, and that stinks already, and then they're immune compromised, who is going to be the creative person who can organize everybody to get to this park and to have a connecting experience with the person, or to have some sort of Zoom movie share event or something like that, whatever, is the right fit for the personality of the person going through it. But so I think, one of those bold people who's ready to kind of organize something is probably really important right now. That's another one that pops out.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. One that pops out to me is, I think, unfortunately, with young adults, sometimes with their support networks being so scattered, and maybe the patient is in a different geographical location than their family members, and they haven't really formed great social networks with where they currently are living, and their friends are scattered across the country too, is sometimes all those roles fall to one person. And I think a good supporter role might be someone who supports the frontline people or the people who are good at being there in a crisis. And so how can supporters check up on one another to make sure that they're okay and that they're getting the things off their chest that they feel like they need to? And not only that too, but just for a patient, especially, I think especially during the treatment time and stuff, if the bulk of your relationship with maybe a particular friend or a sibling or something is just texting goofy stuff to one another, or talking about common interests, you know, maybe that, I think that's how a lot of millennials and Gen Z people talk to one another anyway. Having people continue that and not feel like they can't do that anymore because their friend has cancer. And so I think really assessing what, you know, what your relationship is like with the patient to begin with, what the patient's like preferred identity is and how cancer like maybe threatens that identity. So if it's a person who really prides himself on being independent or not showing a lot of vulnerability or, you know, wanting to live as normally as possible, like trying to validate that as much as possible through how you're talking to them, and realizing that some of the things you might do for that patient, like, you know, like dropping in or, you know, offering to clean up the house or, you know, doing certain things might in some ways invalidate their feelings as a person who's really independent. And so finding ways maybe to kind of navigate those conflicting goals in some ways. It's easier said than done, but I think having that open dialogue at the beginning is really important too.
Piggyback on the idea about dialogue, I think like just one of the most important things for any supporter to do is to just ask the person what they want and need,
Yes.
you know. And I know a lot of people are like, let me know if you need anything, you know, and then sort of maybe disappear or, you know, but also just even ask more specifically, like with one of my patients has told me, is like, you know, it was great to go out to lunch, but they didn't even ask me about my chemotherapy or my tumor or anything. I feel like they just didn't even care. They were, you know, and so like just ask, you know, do you want to talk about what's going on? You want to talk about other stuff?
Sure.
You know, I kind of always say, if in doubt, put it on the table. So just, you know, ask like, maybe more specifically than what do you need, but maybe start with what do you need, and maybe the person will have a really clear idea to tell you. It will have no inhibitions about telling you. But if not, then ask some follow-up stuff like, you know, can I bring you dinner? Does anything sound good? Or do you want to talk about what's going on, or do you want to talk about other stuff? You know, I'm all ears if you have the capacity to do that kind of thing. But just ask, and ask in different ways, and don't just ask once.
I think acknowledge in general can be helpful, whether it's in the form of the question, or also I think sometimes I read something on Aya Northwest posted something on Instagram the other day that was like, tell your friend that they can come whenever they want and that they can leave whenever they want. And I was like, that's genius. I wish people said that to me every time they invited me to something when I didn't feel good. Even though I knew that, I'm the kind of person that it would have just made me feel great to have in the back of my head that little sweet permission from someone else. So please join us. Yeah, please join us. But like, also you can come and be there for 5 minutes. We just want to see your face if you want to come. That's so much, there's so much room in that.
Interesting. Nick, I have a question for you. What about if the preferred identity is in conflict with the support you need? You know, so for example, if my girlfriend, if I got cancer and my girlfriend took over the caretaker role and was doing a lot of things for me, that would be a challenge. And in some sense, like it would be embarrassing. And I'm not exactly sure, even if I did need her support in that sense, you know, and I'm talking like that, even the manual things, like her driving me places or things like that, like that, it would be a really big challenge for me that identity flipped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, there's not one universal answer. It's so we would call, using this theory that I use called normative rhetorical theory, that looks at maybe some of the reasons why support isn't always perceived as helpful. It's like you said, that identity and the relational dynamic are at odds with the task that needs to be performed. And so what the couple usually does is find some sort of solution to that dilemma. And that's kind of up to the couple. And maybe sometimes the couple negotiates a way that like if you were the patient in the situation, maybe they can find ways that you can provide support to the supporter, because that dynamic has been flipped and it's causing some like tension in the relationship. Or sometimes just gritting your teeth and getting through it. And so there's not really a universal answer to that, but that's a really good question.
So what other ways can good support turn bad? I know you had a poster that kind of lined out like, obviously this is bad support, obviously this is good support, but then you had this middle bucket, like this gray area. What were some of the things that fell in there?
Yeah, so it was like kind of like a lot of what we talked about earlier is just like the relational support that we talked about, where we want people to be around us, but sometimes like everybody is jammed into one hospital room back when we were kind of allowed to do that, or we had visitors and we felt like we had to entertain them, or people sending us constant messages and feeling like it's hard to get back to everybody. And so kind of that relational support can be suffocating in some ways, but then when it's non-existent, we wish it was there. And then there's also the instrumental supports where like I talked about, the kind of the hovering and things that can turn into hovering or babying or kind of helicoptering, where you want the ability to be capable of doing certain things, and it's really hard when you're 22 or 23 and maybe you have to move back in with your parents and you feel like you've regressed in life. And so obviously it's like very frustrating. It's this paradox where it's something that I need and I have to admit to myself that I need it, but it's still like a hard pill to swallow. And then also the other one that I saw that was kind of mixed was kind of these expressions of like validation for the person, like saying, like I think what you went through was very brave and it's heroic, or some people were like, wow, it was really meant a lot to me that people recognize that. And people like, I felt very like good about myself that I got through cancer and that I handled it with grace and stuff like that. And then other people are like, felt like they were almost being invalidated by those things. Like they were putting me up on a pedestal that I didn't deserve in some ways. Like, I just went through cancer. Like I didn't fight a heroic battle. You didn't see me at my lowest points. And so they think that that's kind of naive in some ways. And it was something that kind of turned them off.
Julie, do you have anything to add, either from your research or from conversations with patients that you've worked with?
About support gone bad?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been hearing a lot lately about when support disappears. And so, maybe there was a lot of support, during treatment or when they were in the hospital, and again, pre-COVID, you could have visitors and things like that, or even visits at their house and stuff. And then when the supporters have perceived that sort of the treatment's done, whether it's actually done or whether it's just they don't really know what the treatment is, and so it's not as frequent, and blah blah blah. When they perceive it's done, it's like, oh, done, gone on back. And what I've really heard several people talking with me about lately is feeling like feeling kind of used by the supporters, of like to post on social media of like, look at the good friend I'm being, helping my cancer friend. And then the photo op is done because cancer treatment is done and they've disappeared. And maybe that was not the intention at all, but that's how they have felt. And I've heard this from like 3 or 4 people recently. And so, that just feels terrible when people tell me about that. It was just feeling used for a photo op or for, to get some likes and follows and things like that. And I'm not that tech savvy, so my vocabulary is off and stuff. But they've talked about that lately.
Especially when the person's not really close to the patient, like before cancer, and they're like, why are you telling me I'm so pretty now with my shaved head when you never told me I was pretty before? Like, what's changed now? Like, why are you all of a sudden?
Or they sort of came out of the woodwork to be important. Like, I thought you really did kind of like me now, but now you're gone again. With the photo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, you're quiet over there. Do you have anything to add to that?
I blame social media. And I didn't have that experience. I had people genuinely show up for me, and they did not always do it perfectly, but I didn't ever feel like, and maybe I think it has to do with the time. And, you know, when I was an adolescent going through this, when I think that people, that might be more apt to happen during that age group, or kind of like younger times, that wasn't an option. People didn't do that. Things, you know, yeah. I think things can go wrong when we misperceive people's intentions too. I mean, I think that sometimes that might feel like it's showing up and performative, and maybe it's actually something a little bit more than that, but it's not articulated, so it's hard to figure out. But I mean, no, bailing or ghosting folks post treatment, you shouldn't do it.
Yes.
Fair. Very, very fair. So let's talk a little bit about self-care, and self-care for supporters. I believe it was you, Nick, that mentioned that there almost needs to be a supporter for the primary supporter. And especially in this world now where there's like this one visitor rule. So there's a lot on usually one person's shoulder. I would love to hear how supporters can make sure, and Rachel, maybe you're a good person to kick this off because you touched on it a little bit already, but you know, this emotional literacy piece to it, and just making sure you're in the right place in order to provide support. How can people make sure that they're taking care of themselves along with supporting their friend?
I think that, again, what people have the capacity for is going to be based on their emotional literacy, where they are at in their development, what experiences that they've had before, other traumas that this might trigger. There's a whole psychology to the supporter as well, and how supporters maintain their emotional and mental well-being through this not only impacts how well they support now, but how they build resilience and become stronger people who can support other community members or friends or family members in the future. So supporters feeling like they're doing okay is important. And if you are a primary supporter, or if you are a fringe supporter or a middle ground supporter, or whatever role you play, you deserve to take care of yourself too. And I think, you know, it's really great when there's more than one person who is able to play a couple different roles, because you can trade off and take a break. But if you can't do that and you're doing everything yourself, if you're a caregiver, it's a whole other story, and burnout and caregiving is I think probably a whole other webinar. But I think checking in on how you're doing as you go along is really important. And if you haven't ever done that before and you don't know the stages of grief, I think young people would really benefit from having the opportunity of their parents or their guardians or their family members saying, young person who is supporting these other people, you know, how are you doing? Or hopefully there's a coach or a teacher or somebody checking on these other kids who might be experiencing stages of grief, and not know that they're experiencing that, but they're mad all the time and their friend is going through cancer, and that might not register as a thing that's really important, but their emotional well-being is really important in that moment too. And then there's some really good just self-care tools and check-ins, and I'm going to post a little self-care assessment, because we could all do little self-assessments as we move through these experiences that help us get a sense of how we're doing when it might feel too busy to actually register that. So there's one. Just little tools to be able to check in and see how you're doing.
Awesome. Nick, Julie, anything to add to that?
I think that the validation piece is really important. I think especially as like, we mentioned, like as a young adult who it's really hard to pause our lives at this point, I think, because either we're going through school or very early in our careers and we don't have kind of the built up kind of equity that older people do, can maybe sometimes take a little bit more time away from work. We're still trying to figure out who we are. And I think that validation from maybe a more experienced person in our support network to tell us that we are doing a good job. And, like Rachel said, even if it's not just the primary supporter, the person who's kind of in the trenches every day, but just a person who's, a fringe supporter or a peer or a friend, and they want to send a message and or do something nice. And I think just having another person there to say, I think you did a really good job with that. I think you handled that really well. You're showing maturity. Like this is, like Rachel said, a building block for you to be better able to handle situations that are difficult in the future. And so maybe using it as like a teachable moment, as a teachable moment or like a validating moment, I think is really important. And if it is a person in the trenches, then you do have the opportunity to kind of relieve that person so that they can do some self-care, like go to the gym or just go sit in the bathtub by themselves for an hour or something. Like that's so important too.
I really like that idea of the validation and also almost sort of like mentoring of the supporters, especially for the young peer supporters, and having somebody that they can even like sort of brainstorm with, so partly brainstorming, partly validation, partly mentoring, partly confidants, to talk, sort of combining everything, but somebody they can just, talk to about like, oh, wow, it was a lot harder for me to see my friends feeling like this than I thought it would be. I'm having these feelings. I don't know what to do with them, or something. Or like, I feel like I'm not doing enough. I feel like I should be doing this and blah, 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 blah. And, in the words of Brene Brown, you are enough, and feeling like it's okay, really, that idea that's been mentioned of, sort of know what your wheelhouse is and know what you bring to the relationship and know what you brought to the relationship before cancer. What is it that you bonded over? What's your thing? Maybe me as the supporter, even before the cancer, our relationship wasn't about socializing with a big group, but it was about movie night with pizza. How can I approximate some of the same sort of thing, so like Rachel was talking about, being authentic and genuine and that sort of stuff. And that's what I bring to the table. It's the same thing I tell my patients of like, what are your goals and what are you working for? And they're going to be different now, potentially, while you're going through treatment, but how can you approximate some of that? Or I talk with parents about how can you approximate routines or special family rituals or stuff like that, and same kind of thing with the friend relationship of, how did you guys interact before? What was what was special about your relationship before? What was that distinct, unique quality? And what's a version of that you can do now? Maybe you can't go out to the movie theater, but you can bring the movie in, to the house and, have pizza or whatever and spend that one-on-one time together, not have to do everything. Just sort of know, this is my wheelhouse. This is what I have to contribute. This is what our relationship was based on before and continue to be based on now.
Yeah, and just two quick things to add to that too. Like you mentioned, like, we talk a lot about the importance of open communication and being open in our families or with maybe the person who's closest to us helping us get through an illness or something, but you can't be totally open. Like there are certain things that you should not tell the person, and that you maybe need to find a pressure outlet or a valve somewhere outside of the relationship. And so that's another thing that a supporter of a supporter can be, that pressure out valve to help them blow off steam or to help them talk about something they can't talk about with a patient. And one thing that people forget too is if you are like the best friend of a person with cancer or like a romantic partner of a person with cancer, like you are suffering a huge loss, especially as that patient's going through treatment is not maybe feeling like themselves. And so this person is experiencing huge social loss and they're missing the person who they usually tell everything to or is there to support them. And so having a person outside of that relationship who can really serve as a pressure valve, and then our listening ear is really important. And I think, Julie, what you mentioned too, that was really important, is knowing your relationship to the patient and knowing kind of how you've always been there for them. And if you're the type of person who, when the patient's been through a difficult experience in the past, maybe you don't sit and talk about it. Maybe you're just there playing video games with them or doing things to kind of distract or entertain. I was mentioning before the meeting that I read a book recently that's not related to cancer, but it's by a favorite author of mine named Will Leach, and he wrote a novel about a young adult who was going through kind of the juvenile version of multiple sclerosis. And he was in his 20s, and his mom, he was serving when he was maybe 16 or 17 as a caregiver to his mom who was going through breast cancer. And one day they receive a package they were kind of at the height of treatment and just completely hollowed out and hanging on by a thread emotionally. And one day they receive a package, and they open it up, and it's just this red button, like almost like, you remember that easy button from Staples that people would have on their desks and stuff. But it looked like that, and they're like, should we press it? Like, there was no name on it or anything. And they press it, and this button just goes very loud, like, danger, danger, fart detected, and emergency, emergency. And they just like died laughing. And they laughed about it for like an hour to completely help them feel better. And it wasn't anything they thought they needed or could have told anybody that they needed, right? It was just this kind of random thing. And the guy, it ended up being his best friend, who had never really been there to like sit and get into the weeds and talk with them really emotionally about a certain issue, but he was just always there to kind of be there as a distractor. And he's like, oh yeah, I totally forgot, I ordered that for you and I didn't put my name on it. And they're like, we loved that, that was amazing. And so just even like random things like that we think are nothing can really make a big impact.
For sure. It's a really great idea. So we are going to be opening up Q&A here. So if anybody listening in right now has a question for any of our panelists or all of our panelists, please use the chat feature to post those questions. I do have a couple questions in here to start things off. First question is around staying consistent, and it's ideas that you guys have as a supporter to make sure that somebody doesn't accidentally ghost a friend because life gets busy and things happen. How would you stay consistent in that? What would be your strategy? I can point that at Rachel, I guess, to start with.
How would I, as a supporter, stay consistent?
Yeah. Supporting your friend.
Mm-hmm. Well, we all get busy, and after a really intense treatment and things like that, I understand why supporters are done when treatment is done, especially if they did a great job, because it's tiring and it's scary and it's hard. And I think that just as we remember, as we take in what has occurred, just reminding ourselves that the person who went through that is integrating what has occurred. So take a moment for yourself, digest your experience, and then remember the person whose body this happened to is digesting this experience a couple fold. So text them and say hi and say that you're thinking about them and you're wondering how they're doing. I mean, just asking how folks are doing makes, a really big impact. I know you must still be like reverberating from all of, don't text that. That's too hard to spell. Just say, I know you must still be integrating this, and how are you doing? How are you doing today? What are you thinking about? What was the hardest part? Just say hi.
Julie, I see you jumped off mute as well. Do you have something to add?
I was just thinking about again how crazy lives become, and I make a New Year's resolution every year to send birthday cards, and I can't even remember that, but it does help when things pop up in my calendar, like it's this person's birthday or stuff like that. And I know for me it's helpful, and I'm just kind of thinking about an experience with a friend who had cancer, of like putting some dates down of like, this is this milestone or that milestone, or that it's in between this milestone, or like putting some things actually in my calendar to check in with her. And, she's not right here, so I don't see her all the time and stuff, but I hate to say it, I'm old and disorganized, so I got to use my calendar to do that a lot. But just things of like, or certain events of like, oh, I want to make sure again, this is the thing I did with my friend. And so this thing's coming up. So I want to make sure to make a note for myself somewhere, reach out to them about that, or this funny thing, or things like that. Or to know, like, it's okay to reach out to people you haven't talked to for a while. And it's fine, which is something I talk with my younger patients about anyway, of like, in all my wisdom of my older years, there are friends that you might not talk to for a year or two, but you can sort of pick up where you left off but we older have this life experience to know that has happened. But for younger people, it might feel like, oh my God, I haven't talked to him for a year. Like, I can't, like, I'm so terrible. Like, I can't go back. Now I have to apologize, like, just call or text or like, oh, I was thinking about you today. I remember when we did this funny thing or something. Like, just don't be afraid to just throw it out there anyway, even if you feel like, oh, there's so much time has gone under the bridge, it would be too awkward to reach out now, or oh my God, I forgot your test result was last week. What happened? It's okay. Just do it. Just reach out. Just do it.
Agreed. And I am young and disorganized and use my calendar as well. It's my lifeline. Nick, anything to add to that?
No, I think you guys nailed it. What I would just kind of add to that is just reminding yourself as a supporter to not let perfect be the enemy of good. Like, just kind of rephrase what you guys are talking about, and to be kind to yourself and to be forgiving to yourself if maybe something was clunky that you tried to do before, or you did forget something, or you haven't reached out in a while. Like, don't give up and just say, well, I'm just going to wait for the patient to reach out to me. Like, don't give up on it, and forgive yourself and allow yourself the opportunity to try things. And if they don't work, then they don't work, but learn from it and move on.
Awesome.
And you can say you're sorry.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, so many times, yeah, absolutely. And there are many people who I talked to who said they had a friend who just completely ghosted them. And when they saw on social media that the person was doing better, and maybe that person just couldn't handle it. Maybe they had a parent who died of cancer, or somebody who really reminded them of a previous experience, and they just couldn't handle it, and it was crappy. And I think the patient wasn't totally completely 100% forgiving, but at least the person said, hey, I'm really sorry that I did this. Here's the reasons why I couldn't do it, and I want to try to improve going forward. But yeah.
I had friends say, sorry, I really wanted to call her. I really wanted to show up better. And I was lucky enough to have core supporters that wasn't super impactful when that happened. And I was busy with my health. But hearing that, and then hearing their authentic share, was bonding, and it was good, and it was a good reconnect. And they forgave themselves. I quickly forgave them because that's my nature, and we moved on.
Sure, exactly. And I know Abby has posted, someone from Be Present has posted about Emily McDowell on social media, but she's a cancer survivor who made kind of greeting cards and cards for people who wanted to reach out to a patient and maybe don't really know what to say, and really are kind of wary of some of those cliches that we talked about today that survivors hate to hear. And one of the ones that she has is, I know that I didn't reach out to you all through treatment. It was really difficult for me. And so just kind of using that to get the ball rolling, and you can add your own message to that and stuff. But I think the authenticity piece is really important.
That's super cool. Abby, I don't know if you could find that post and drop that into the chat, but people might be interested in checking out some more of her cards. Another question came in here, and it is, how do I know what kind of support I'll be best at if I haven't been through something like this before? Julie, would you like to start?
Yeah, the thing that just jumped into my brain was of, how do you relate to people anyway? And what is your style of interacting with people? And that's, I think, your biggest indicator. Are you the person that, brings cupcakes to school for someone's party, someone's birthday or something like that, then, do that kind of thing again. Are you a big group person? Are you a small group person? Like, just what is your style of interacting with people and interacting with that person in particular, and use that to lead you and stuff. It's hard. It's hard being a supporter. It's hard being a primary supporter, but it's hard enough to be a supporter without trying to be the kind of supporter that you really aren't, and then failing at that, like unintentionally failing maybe, but just because you bit off more than you could chew, or because it was a mismatch, because it wasn't what you do. I know I am not the kind of supporter that can organize a meal train and email 50,000 people and make a post about it and everything like that. I am not that kind of person. But I am a person that can be like, I love to cook and I love to bake. So, like, what do you want to eat? Even if it's buttered noodles or whatever, I will be happy to make that and bring that to you. That our relationship is based on food. I can provide you food, or beverages or whatever, but like, what is our way of interacting? What is special and about our bond anyway? And so, that's going to be the core of how I can support my friends.
That's a really great answer. Rachel, Nick, anything to add there?
No, I love that. I don't have anything to add besides, looking into models like I talked about before. I really like that kind of investigation, just different ways to understand yourself, because I think that there's opportunity for the supporters in this to grow. So if you don't know how to do it, this is the time to learn a little bit more about yourself. But I really love the starting point that Julie's talking about. You don't have to remake the wheel. Who are you? What is the authentic nature of your relationship? And how can you, what did you call it before, Julie? How can you, okay. How can you do something like that? I love that.
Fair. Nick, anything else to add?
No, I think you guys nailed it. I think, again, to go back to the idea of not only, keeping in mind your previous relationship with the person and the things that you usually bring to the table in your relationships, but also, again, realizing that some of the ways we learn about who we are is by relating to people and trying things. And, our identities are not constructed in a vacuum. We don't learn who we are by just being by ourselves. And so don't let that kind of nervousness for that be stopping you from trying to reach out to somebody, because even if it didn't go as well as you had hoped, it's something you can learn.
Awesome.
And it might bloom into something really special and beautiful that neither one of you expected.
Exactly. That
muffin drop off might turn into a 2-hour conversation that turns into a friendship of a lifetime.
Very true. Well, that is the last question that I see in the chat. If anybody else has any more questions, feel free to drop them in, but we will start to wrap this up and close this. So I'd like to give each of the panelists an opportunity just to share a contact information. And if you have a specific call to action, something you're excited about, or you want to share with the audience, would love to hear that. So Rachel, why don't you start us off? Best way that people can reach out to you and get connected with you, and anything else that you'd like to share.
You can go to my website, circadianhealth.com. I'll put it in the chat in a sec. And at Circadian Health on Instagram, I share a lot there about self-advocacy tips, mental health and growth through challenge, different kinds of patient advocacy tips sometimes. And I like to think a lot and share a lot about different kinds of modalities for support, because that is often what I do with folks. is help find them the right modalities of support for them. So you can find a little bit more about me there. And I don't have a big ask, just, hang and find your way. I like what Nick said, that identity doesn't happen in a vacuum. No one would ask for this situation upon the person who's experiencing cancer or the supporters, but there's opportunity to grow and to learn how to be your best self and to develop self-awareness. And I think those are all really cool things. So try.
Awesome. And we did get a couple more questions that popped in here. And Rachel, I think you could probably take this one on. So they asked, when trying to coordinate, should I go through the caregiver or should I go directly to the patient?
Go through the caregiver, or if you have a direct relationship normally with the patient, you can ask the patient. It's just the kind of relationship that you have with the person who's not well. And even if you usually coordinate with the patient, but you know that they're sick today or this week, try another route. Does anybody else have another? Yeah.
No, I think that's great. So Nick, I'll turn things over to you. And I also have another question that popped up here in the Q&A. But first, if people would like to reach out, get connected with you, where would you direct them? And then anything that you would like to share with the audience outside of that?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm on Twitter at N and then my last name, Iannarino, Iannarino. I mainly do research. I teach 3 classes each semester at University of Michigan's campus in Dearborn, which is just outside of Detroit. And so my research is I just collected 54 interviews with young adult cancer patients and survivors who during COVID. So I started in June 2020 and kind of wrapped those up in March or April of 2021. And looking at things like how they had to pivot to kind of telemedicine or telehealth, and kind of how their social support changed, and some of the things we talked about today about how like the increase in online options for support and advocacy groups really helped their experience. And just kind of handling, talking to family members who didn't really believe COVID was a real thing and they were in an immunocompromised situation. And so I'm kind of currently going through that data. I also do stuff with infertility conversations and just kind of trying to improve the interactions between patients and healthcare providers. Maybe healthcare providers who are used to treating a cancer patient and who's older and not really used to the kind of quality of life concerns that cancer treatment or a diagnosis can really bring up. And so that's kind of some of the stuff I post on there. I'm also affiliated with our cancer center at University of Michigan, and we're starting to build a young adult cancer program in our children's hospital. So kind of post some updates there. But yeah, so I agree with Rachel. If you're in a situation where you're trying to figure out how to support somebody through cancer, remember, just lean on kind of your previous relationship with the person, that person probably wants some sort of normalcy in some ways, and how can you maybe reinforce that? And if all else fails, send them a gift card, get them a gas card, an Amazon card, and maybe punt and figure it out later, because something is better than nothing, even if it's just like like a message you write on a card or something to them. So just build from there and find your way.
Awesome. And being the communication guy, I'll give you this question that came in. What is the best way to tell someone you don't like something they did when you know they'll take it the wrong way?
Yeah, that's thorny and that's difficult. I think there's a couple different things that came to mind when I saw this question, if possible. So I'll think about it in terms of like maybe someone who just keeps buying someone like stuffed animals or something. Maybe say, hey, my family would really love a gift card to Chipotle or something, or like, would you mind sending, my mom who's been doing all this work for me, like maybe a gift card for groceries or something like that. And so maybe like providing an alternative way to like have them spend money on something that's actually useful. I think like if it needs to be a more direct conversation, remembering that the person is not doing it intentionally, and that you have to kind of own that it is your own perspective. And so put it into I language. So say like, like, I know that you're really well intentioned here, but I find it like, I think that I would prefer you to do this. And if you have to go into detail about how it makes you feel, you can, but making sure that the person, if they take it the wrong way, that they don't beat themselves up over it, that it's okay. And so I think just really being sensitive about that. But that's not a reason not to bring it up. Like, you have to kind of advocate for yourself in some way, but you can do it in a way that, you let the person off the hook by saying, maybe you were intending this or this, but it would be more effective in the future if we did this.
Awesome. Really great. And Julie, I'll turn things to you. Same questions. If people want to reach out, get connected with you, where's the best place to do that? Is there anything exciting that you would like to direct people to? And then you can have the softball question at the end as well. Just one piece of advice to leave the audience. It seems like it's a mostly a group of supporters. So if you want to direct it that way, you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't really have a social media presence, so I'm not easy to find, but I can be found at the children's.com is our easy hospital thing, and you can search for me there and get connected to me with my email or things like that there. So that's the easiest way to contact me, children's.com. I think the big thing, I think, to sort of wrap up is that you mentioned at the beginning, I'm very focused on hope and resiliency, and and that's what I've been doing my research on for the last 13 years that I've been at Children's. And the big thing about that just really hits home to me is that with all the work I do in building hope and resiliency is that, people know deep down, people know what they need, and it can be really hard to ask for, so your friend, your child, your family member that has cancer, they need the opportunity to be able to kind of ask for what they need. They might fumble with it a little bit. It might take them a little bit to figure it out, but they need that opportunity. So give them that opportunity, ask more than once, ask in different ways, know that there's that opportunity there, support them in a way that works genuinely for us, and again, throw out those ideas of like, okay, this is what we've done before. So, would that be helpful? Do you want to do that? Do you want to hang out in that way? But give them the opportunity to answer that question, ask them that question, give them that opportunity to come up with the solution of what they need.
Awesome. Well, Rachel, Julie, Nick, thank you so much for volunteering your evening and sharing such amazing insight and wisdom on behalf of Be Present and everybody that's listening right now. I know we really, really appreciate it. And for those that are tuning in, still listening right now, if you're looking for the replay link, that will be on our website, along with all the future events. We don't have anything, we don't have another webinar that's lined up behind this right now, but you can stay tuned for be-present.org. But also, if you're on social, it's easiest just to follow us at Be Present. Be Present org. So that's BPRESENT.org. That's the best place to get connected with us. And if you are interested in sharing some insight on future topics that you would like us to cover, you can email us, and that's at info@bepresent.org. You can find that online as well. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in, and thank you so much for joining us.